Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Benicevic, and today I get to spend time again with Phil Doak.
Back here again, Mark.
Back again, yeah. Well, I thought that conversation last time was so good, I wanted to come back and do some more.
No.
Thank you for your time.
All good.
So Phil's a partner at Mosaic Financial Services Infrastructure, which is a consulting firm that works with a whole lot of financial services entities across New Zealand. A really, really fascinating business. And he's also a chartered member of the Institute of Directors with experience on a number of boards and prior executive experience as well in banking and funds management as well. So a lot of great experience to draw on. So thank you very much again for your time.
You're welcome.
So the first thing we were going to talk about is really an extension of what we spoke about last time, with this whole concept of managing risk in a business. And the area of conversation that we wanted to talk about today was how the board delegates, or to whom a board can delegate some of the oversight of the risk function. So tell me how that works.
Sure. Well, I guess we talked last time about the board forming a view on the key risks to its purpose and strategy, and what those risks are, and there's then a conversation that goes, well, which of those? I mean, ultimately, notwithstanding the board has overall responsibility for oversight of everything. It can form a view on those risks that it wants to own directly as a board entity, versus those that it actually wants to delegate to a subcommittee, for example, right? And so usually a subcommittee is formed to focus on certain aspects of risk that the board's comfortable to delegate on that basis. It's usually chaired by one of the directors who has some specific expertise in the particular area, and it enables. And it usually has other directors, depending on the size of the board. It might have 2 or 3 other directors with it as well. It may bring representatives from management into the frame to support conversations. It may also quite often will bring external parties and specialists into the frame as well. So the idea is that the board is seeking that committee to focus on a particular issue, and that issue may be managing particularly the aspects of finance. So often you have a finance and audit committee. Sometimes that is packaged with risk, so it's a finance, audit and risk committee. But often risk is, and increasingly with the focus on recognising that managing financial risk is one thing, managing non-financial risk is got a whole set of different dimensions to it. So often you'll find there is the opera or the non-financial risk is put into a separate committee. I've chaired and been involved in both those models. Beyond that, you usually find, I've seen examples where a board has created a subcommittee focused on technology. For example, focused on, often you'll find ones focused on nominations, which is around succession and board appointments. In the funds management business, you've got an investment committee, which is a mission critical area of risk from that perspective as well. And then also on occasion, I've been involved where the board has decided to form a subcommittee for a period of time to focus on a particular issue. It could be an acquisition, it could be a particular commercial matter. So that sort of drives the what, and then it empowers the committee through a charter. Again, in my experience, it's been through a charter. So the charter sets out what's the purpose of the committee, who's on the committee, what its functional areas of scope are. So, for example, in a risk committee, you might have scope for aspects of product development, cyber security, technology risk, people, a number of those sort of things. In the finance committee, usually there's a piece in there around the efficacy of financial statements, managing the audit process, financial control, solvency, those sort of things. I mean, you're not running the firm per se, right? But particularly around the appointment of auditor and the financial statements process is examples there. So the charter will set those responsibilities out, and the board will, via the charter, say these are the decision rights of that committee. Can it actually decide anything? And in some cases, it may be, well, you can, often it's about make a recommendation to the board, rather than decide. So we recommend the financial statements here, or the audit, or whatever that might be. And in other cases, it may be you have the scope to modify policy in these areas, but on these areas of policy, you need to recommend to the board for the final decision, right? So it all depends on really on how, because obviously in delegating to the subcommittee, the board is still responsible for everything, right? So, but it just means you can bring a group of specialists around the table that are focused on particular matters, which leads to a better sort of outcome. So, and they usually meet on a cycle not dissimilar to the main board cycles, but I've been involved in one where, and this is, when you're facing into some difficult issues, like COVID, for example,
yes.
where I was chair of a finance and audit committee. We're meeting every fortnight,
yeah,
right? So, because you're very much, that's in a crisis situation, you
yes.
do what you need to do to focus on the matter at hand. But, in a normal course, it's meeting on a similar in a cycle. But, isn't if required?
Yeah,
it's
interesting you're talking about having a separation these days between an audit committee and a risk committee, because I've been on boards where you have an audit and risk committee, and quite often it's very focused on the financials, and there's no real experience or skill there on risk management. And as you say, the difference between financial and non-financial risk is quite significant. Well,
it's interesting. There's a ASIC in Australia did a corporate governance review of the management of non-financial risk across a bunch of substantive entities in Australia,
yes,
banks included. And it was a really interesting read if you want to read of it, about the challenges, because a lot of the issues that were manifesting in that environment weren't financial issues; they were non-financial risk issues,
yes.
right? And it went to a whole bunch of things relating, which is one of the challenges as a director, is what information are you seeing? What data are you seeing? What
yes.
insight can you draw? Because it's about insight, not just being flooded, right? And in that report, they had a graph that showed the relative size of the packs, the reading packs that went to these subcommittees.
Yeah.
And they ranged from like 130 pages to like 700 pages, and I think the average was like 300 or something. And so the question being asked was, how on earth, if you're faced with that, and that's just non-financial risk, right?
Yes.
How do you draw the insights from that and try and exercise your judgment faced with that level, that volume of information? So it's an interesting read, because I think there's a real, and whether it's the board or whether it's the subcommittee, you need information, and that whether that's coming from management, which obviously there are times when you need to exercise your independent judgment and seek challenge on that. Whether you're seeking insights from third parties outside of the business, and the extent as a director you are looking outside the business to form your own opinion of view, which you need to do. Bringing those together, and whether it's in the subcommittee or the board itself, is a challenge. And in the non-financial risk space, it's particularly, it has a lot of moving parts to it, because
it does, and as you've implied before, it's a very different skill set, right? Where you need people with the broader business executive level experience, understanding what's going on in the market, whereas quite often your audit committee, as we talked about earlier, whether it's on camera or off, is quite often populated with accountants and people with strong finance backgrounds. So merging those two areas together of audit and risk, if you populate an audit and risk committee very much with accountants, you're going to get a lot of financial discussions.
I think what sits behind the numbers, though, is really important, and because the numbers are reflecting the dynamics of the business and the commercial elements of the business, and I think over time, a good finance committee is simply looking at it from an accountancy point. I mean, I've chaired a finance committee. I'm not a chartered accountant. I'm more an analyst, right? Yes. In fact, my background is more as a financial analyst. So I will work with, obviously, audit and accountants who have that perspective, but our focus was more on what are the numbers telling us.
Yes.
What insights do we have of the business and its trajectory and the risks related to that trajectory, and sitting behind that clearly is, can we believe the numbers, which goes to the strength of financial control, and that sits behind all that. But
that's a key element of it, right? When you're talking about historical financial accounts, by the time they hit historical financial accounts, it's too late.
You've got to be looking forward.
And if you're looking forward to budget, it'll only include the risks that have already been considered and that they think are likely to be realised. And when you're looking at risk in a business, you can't just look at the stuff that you're already confident is going to happen. You've got to look at the stuff that might happen, and that won't be reflected in your finances as well.
And I guess without moving into the zones of the board discussion, obviously the board is focused through the reporting of the executive on forecasts and the financial trajectory of the business. But having a dynamic view of that, you might have your budget, you have your forecast, but what are the scenarios? Going through COVID focused the mind very, very quickly in that such scenario where you were focused on one thing, and it was from a financial perspective, that was cash.
Yes.
What is the forecast cash burn, right? And that was driving you, and to get through that such that you still maintained. You had sufficient resilience to be able to build back. I know it's slightly cliche, but build back better on the other side of that, and still fulfil your purpose as a firm.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you very much. Now, there was a topic that we jumped into briefly last time, but we didn't get to dig into in too much detail. I just wanted to dig into it a little bit more today. We talked about, and this is going actually inside the business and off the board level, but very much associated with this concept of managing risk within the business. And we often talk in our industry about line 1, line 2, line 3 defence. What is that?
Yeah, well, the way I think about it, line 1 is essentially your frontline people that are
people that
engaging with clients, but it's just they're ones that are creating products in the front end of the organisation,
doing the
and as part of that, they are operating with risks, right? And from a line 1 perspective, you want the line 1, as you may define that, to be taking ownership of those risks, understand those risks.
Yes.
And to work with, often they work with line 2, who step one step back from that to help develop what is an appropriate control framework in place.
Right.
Often they'll have their own resourcing that, for example, in financial advice, you might financial advisors that are obviously supporting clients with financial plans, and you may have a quality assurance folk, a team that's sitting alongside those advisors, just checking that things are happening, that the right things are happening, portfolio construction guidelines are being followed, all those sort of things. And that can, then the framework that they're using is where line 2 helps work with line 1 to develop that framework, and then line 2 will go and look at, is that framework effective? Is the quality assurance working? Is it supportive of the outcomes that we have in place? And so they're providing the framework, and they've got an obligation to sort of see the insights that are coming from that. I mean, ideally you've got line 1 going, we can see what's not happening here, and we're going to take ownership and fix that. But then line 2 is one step removed and going, well, that's fine, but we're seeing this information, and we're managing our compliance obligations and those things to support that. And then line 3 is really often in a large firm that can be internal audit, or that, and in other cases, if you don't have a sufficient scale to have an internal audit function, at times you can seek external third-party assurance to come in, and they'll come in and look at take a more holistic view as well, or they may go in and look at specific risk areas, specific control areas to provide line 2 and line 1 with assurance that this is all hanging together. And so that could be, looking in at aspects of accounting pieces. It could be looking at aspects of cyber security, a range of different things. So you've got that frontline ownership. You've got your risk and compliance team supporting that,
yes.
And usually reporting up often through independently. And if it's chief risk officers often have lines independently to the board risk committee or to the board. So there's a degree of separation. It's important that there's a degree of separation between that line 1, line 2, and then line 3 is another level of separation.
Right. So to summarise then, and what I found interesting when you first talked about this, so line 1 is not just the people doing the work; it's also the people checking that the work's being done according.
Well, there's a level of QA. I mean, you think about anyone that's, even if it's entering, processing stuff, you've got people that are doing that, but often there are quality control functions sitting within those parts of the business.
So it's your line 2, which comes out of your risk function, that is creating the controls that essentially line 1 are checking themselves. So line 1 and line 2 work together to establish those controls. Line 1 have their own QA team to check that those controls are being followed, and then they'll be continually working with line 2 to make sure those controls are effective. And as you said, line 1 will report through to management. Line 2 will report through the risk officer or some of the risk function, essentially through either to the risk committee of the board or to the board directly. And then line 3, if the company is big enough, such as the larger banks, mistakes and so forth, there'll be an internal audit function that might come in.
Yeah, and that's independent again, and often that can go straight through the board as well.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, there's different models depending on size and scale, and look, and sometimes there's quite a blur between line 1 and line 2 because just depending again on the scale. But the key thing is that line 1 are taking some ownership for managing risk. Within they're not just saying if it goes wrong, it's compliance's problem.
Yes.
Right. And this is where, it's not always. It's the theory and the practice can play out differently, as we touched on in the earlier.
And I think it's very much like governance itself, right? There's no one rule book. You're not saying you want to have a board of directors, here are the rules that you follow, and line 1, line 2, line 3, the defence is very similar where there are various kind of slight variations about how it works, but what we've discussed is fundamentally what happens. Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And as you said before, if an entity's not big enough to have its own line 3, then it would use external advice for that line 3.
Can do, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's certainly wise to do
or
so.
It ups the ante on what line 2's doing as well, obviously. But what you need to be looking for in certain areas, it's very helpful to have independent of the business come in, and sometimes that we get involved in doing that occasionally. To look at that.
Yeah. So as you've said a couple of times, this is all comes down to scale. If the business is very small, it won't have enough scale to have 3 lines.
Well, scale and risk, right? Because you can be small but quite operationally complex.
Yes.
Right. So I think it's fit for purpose. So small doesn't mean low risk.
No.
Small can still have a lot of moving parts operationally.
Absolutely.
And equally, you can be really big but actually quite straightforward.
Yes.
Right. So it depends on your operating model, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and your strategy and what you're doing and the purpose of the business and so forth. Yeah. Let's kind of wind up the conversation about risk then. And I just want to ask you really a couple of questions about governance itself. Mm-hmm. What's the best advice you've received around governance?
I think that, and this was a quote I picked up from another director, but the funny thing is I feel terrible because I can't remember the person's name. So if they're listening to this and I'm not making attributable appropriately, then you need to. I apologise in advance, but we'll dub something on, Mark. We'll dub something on. But it was a comment that the most important thing for you as a director is your name and your integrity. Right. And to me, I think that they always sort of hold that, right? And because as a board, I feel if I'm in a governance role, there's the concept of stewardship, right? You are there for a period of time, hopefully it's an appropriate period of time, and your people have been before you, right? And some of the organisations you have stewardship of, particularly not for profit. The reserves are the accumulation of parents' fees, players' fees for decades. Yes. Right. So as a steward, how am I adding something positive to this? And so for me, it's sort of, can I leave it in better shape than what it was? And whether that's in the moment, I guess, as sitting around the board table in a conversation, if it's a difficult issue, can I add constructively to this conversation, right? Yes. And so, for me, in terms of advice, that piece which sort of goes to your personal integrity and be able to do that, and related to that is also, which I think is important. You're not an executive. You need to remember that, and that which I've had, because I spend a lot of time in executive. I spend a lot of time facing into boards, right? When you're on the other side, it is a different seat, And I've had times when I've been an executive director, which means it's actually quite slightly harder because you definitely need to step out overtly. But you're part of a team as well, and it's a different team to being part of an executive team. Yes. And that plays out when you're facing tricky decisions and you want to look around the board table and feel that everyone's going to be bringing the right thing to the table and with the right objectives and the right motivations to get a better outcome, right? So, I guess they're thoughts.
Great ideas there, and I really like you brought up this concept of stewardship, and it's something that I'd like to explore a little bit more out of the series. And The current Air New Zealand video has got a quote in there, I don't know the Māori, but it talks about how we don't inherit the earth from our parents, we caretake the earth for our children. And I really like that concept, and I think it overlays really strongly with governance, because that's what we're doing, right? It's not our right, it's not our obligation to earn from this business. We're a short-term caretaker of this business for its shareholders, and its other stakeholders.
Yeah, and you want it to move on to the next.
As you said, better than when you arrived. That's very cool. So, given all of the skills and experience that you've had through your career, what's the best advice you'd give to somebody starting on their governance journey?
Well, firstly, I'd make a commitment, but it's a serious commitment, right? I think it carries with it liabilities personally, but beyond that. It has responsibilities, and as we talked in the earlier chat we had, as a director you cast a shadow in the organisation, and
I like that.
And you set a tone. So I think understand it's a serious business. It can be very fulfilling as well, and it's a commitment. I also think be clear on the why, your why and your what. So your why is why you're doing this, right? And I think having a connection, feeling something for the business that you are governing, whether it's in a commercial context or a not commercial context, is really, really important. You need to feel some connection to it, because if you're connected to it and you're interested in it and you're going to read widely about it, you're going to make a difference. And part of the what is like, why you, because there's a lot of skilled people sitting around the table. What is the skill set that you're going to bring, and hopefully it's going to constructively, contribute to it. So, I think being clear on those things is important. As I mentioned before, remember you're in a team. You're there with an independent view, so you need to speak your truth, right? Constructively, civilly, respectively. But equally, particularly if you're on issues, as I mentioned before, you're sitting around the table and you've got a chair who's looking to lead in that context, which is another challenge in and of itself. I think leading in that context, I have huge respect for people that are in a chair role, navigating, particularly in times of difficulty. And I guess the last thing is invest in yourself. I've get involved in the institute and governance, forums. I've spent some time doing that, and there's just such a lot of experience you can draw on. And I'd rather learn informally over a beer or wine or a coffee if I can hear the war stories there, and if I can draw on any of that. I hope I don't have to, but if I can, it's like there's a flying analogy. I used to fly planes years and years ago, and there's the best stories you heard were in the bar from the old pilots, because there's old pilots and bold pilots, but no old bold pilots, right? And so I always remember that as a past private pilot, and they were the stories you heard in the bar, but they're still telling them to you, so that means they're still around, right? So learn from that.
Absolutely, learn from the mistakes of others, so you don't have to make them yourself. That's fantastic. Cool, Phil. Thank you very much again for your time. It's been a great conversation.
Pleasure.
I look forward to catching up soon.
For sure, man.
And see you next episode.
Thank you.